questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your testimony. Without objection, each member will be recognized for 3.5 minutes to accommodate the Treasury Secretary's time. As always, we have to ensure that all members have an opportunity to ask questions of the Secretary. We'll now proceed to questions and answers session, and I'll begin with it first. Yesterday, Secretary, I sent you a letter asking that you provide this committee with legislative language that would accomplish the $4.7 trillion in tax increases contained in your budget proposal within 30 days. The American people, they deserve to know exactly how the Biden administration plans to raise their taxes and the impacts those policies will have on them. So without objection, the letter is entered into the record that I sent you yesterday. So Secretary Yellen, will you commit to providing that legislative text within 30 days to the committee?
Chairman Smith, yesterday the Treasury Department published the so-called Green Book, giving a great deal of detail about all of the proposed changes on the revenue side in this year's budget. And I believe that provides the detail that is necessary to consider these proposals. The Treasury Department always stands ready to work with this committee and members of Congress on tax legislation as you consider it. And of course, we stand ready to do that.
Yeah, I've looked at the Green Book, and we appreciate you all giving it to us yesterday afternoon. It does not provide the legislative text of the tax proposals of $4.7 trillion that your budget calls for. And so what we were asking for the legislative text, so you're not going to send us the legislative text in 30 days?
I don't believe that has ever been done.
I was just
Congress
asking,
usually,
but if, okay.
As I say, we stand ready to work with you as you consider particular proposals, and we'll certainly look at legislative language and give you our feedback. But
if you will present the legislative text to us on your $4.7 trillion in tax proposals, we'd be happy to look at that. And we hope that since that's in your budget, you'll ask that. Last year, Democrats in Congress rammed through $80 billion in mandatory funding for the IRS after your department asked for it in conjunction with the president's first budget proposal. Your plan called for the IRS to monitor nearly every American bank account, to hire 87,000 new employees, and to audit over 1 million more Americans each year, with the majority falling on working-class Americans. The IRS still hasn't given me the plan for the $80 billion and how that $80 billion will be spent, even though we have sent several letters. We've spoken on the phone about that. But that can't be right, Secretary Yellen, that you all don't have a plan yet. Your budget request that was submitted yesterday asked for $14.1 billion in annual appropriations for fiscal year 2024. But that's not all, Secretary. Buried on page 209 of that Green Book that you just highlighted, which explains your proposals, Treasury is asking for an additional $29.1 billion in mandatory funding to, quote, continue IRA-funded enforcement and compliance initiatives and investments. None of that money is dedicated to customer service or IT modernization. Obviously, you all have a plan. You're already funding enforcement and compliance initiatives that have not been disclosed to Congress and the American public. You already got $80 billion for the IRS. Now you want $43.2 billion more, all without explaining what will be done with the first $80 billion. The American people, they deserve to know how their hard-earned tax dollars are being spent and the impact that a supercharged IRS will have on them. So how many more IRS agents will this $43.2 billion get us?
So First, let me say that the strategic operating plan that we've promised to deliver, we will deliver in the
And you'll make that
coming
public
weeks.
to us.
Yes, it will be provided to you.
Thank you.
In the coming weeks. And already we've taken very important steps to improve customer service. The IRS has hired 5,000 additional customer service representatives. I promised that the average level of service in answering taxpayer inquiries this tax season would rise to 85%. And while it varies from week to week, so far we are certainly in that 80 to 90% range. Tax assistance centers are up and operating. Ones that had been closed due to lack of resources are in the process of being reopened. And many of these centers are open on Saturdays to provide help to consumers. Anyone this tax season, any American attempting to get help from the IRS is experiencing a very different environment.
That's good. So, Secretary, audits is something that people really care about. Will there be increased audits on working class families with this new appropriations?
I have directed already that IRA resources will not be used to increase the share of households or small businesses earning less than $400,000 or less that are audited relative to historic levels. And I promise and will ensure that that mandate will be met. And let's remember—
So that's great news. That's great news, Secretary. That's one common thing that we will have. But part of our oversight duties will be make sure that there's not increased audits for small businesses and working families. I do want to go on. We are getting close to 2 years since ProPublica revealed that it had obtained what is called a vast trove of IRS data, including extensive information on the tax returns of thousands of Americans, sufficient to detail their income, taxes, investments, and even the results of audits. You've been asked several times about this issue in public, and always note that you've referred the matter to the Inspector General and the Department of Justice for review. You've also said previously that you take this very seriously, but this is not an issue that can be referred elsewhere and then completely ignored. The American people, they deserve to know that their confidential information is safe at the IRS, and they deserve answers about what happened. Other than refer the matter elsewhere, what actions have you taken in the last 20 months to identify and fix potential vulnerabilities in how the IRS maintains confidential taxpayer information?
Listen, I want to say that I share the same frustration that you're expressing. I would really like to get to the bottom of this. We care deeply about taxpayer privacy, and an unauthorized disclosure of taxpayer information is illegal and something to be taken very seriously. I'm frustrated because we have taken the actions that are appropriate, namely to refer this matter to the appropriate independent investigators, and that includes Treasury's Office of Inspector General, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, and the Department of Justice. All of these agencies conduct their investigations independently, and according to timelines they determine are necessary and appropriate for a complete investigation. I am waiting to see, just as you are, what the outcome of those investigations are.
So you've done no internal audits within Treasury yourself to see if there might have been any kind of leak or any kind of vulnerabilities in protecting taxpayers' confidential information?
These are the agencies that are independent, and
so you're letting them do it?
That's what is appropriate.
Okay,
in this
thank you,
situation.
Madam Secretary. As you know, we've established a portal to allow IRS employees to share information with this committee about any kind of conduct that's going on at the IRS that they think that we should know of, since we're the Committee of Jurisdiction for Oversight. I sent a letter to the IRS and asked that it be shared with all IRS employees. The agency has thus far refused to do so. That is completely unacceptable. IRS employees should know the options they have to report wrongdoing to Congress that they may witness at work. This is a simple issue. It's about basic transparency and accountability. Will you commit to sharing information about our IRS whistleblower portal with IRS employees?
Well, I want to say that we have very strong whistleblower
No, that's what I've heard. But would you?
protections.
My question is will you share our whistleblower with the IRS employees? Yes or no?
I think what is important is that IRS employees know what their full set
Exactly.
of
So-
options are, and they certainly can report to this committee. They can report to other committees.
But will you
of
share
Congress.
this whistleblower information to your IRS employees? Yes or no?
I will make sure that they have the appropriate information, that they know what their obligations are and their full set of obligations and full set
So
of
does that include this whistleblower
possibilities are.
hotline? Does that include this whistleblower hotline, that's something you'll share with them?
I will make sure that they know all of the options that they have.
Does that include
If
this
they-
whistleblower hotline?
It includes this committee, certainly.
In this whistleblower hotline? It's yes or no.
We'll make sure that they are aware.
I hope that you
of
do
their-
for the sake of the American public and for the sake of your IRS employees. On February 16th of this year, President Biden issued an executive order on advancing racial equity through the federal government. That was on February 16th. Treasury Department officials have repeatedly said they want to design tax compliance around racial equity. These statements create the implication that the IRS should take into consideration race and gender in how it manages tax compliance and decides who to audit. But tax returns do not ask taxpayers to identify themselves by race. So the IRS doesn't even have the data on race. That's where the president's executive order comes in. The order instructs the federal government to apply an equity focus to several areas, including to, quote, prevent and remedy discrimination, including by protecting the public from various discrimination. It seems clear that this executive order is instructing the IRS to change its process to make audit decisions based on taxpayers' race. Secretary Yellen, do you think there is any circumstance where the IRS should consider a person's race or gender when deciding whether someone should be audited?
The IRS doesn't know an individual's race, and we are certainly not proposing that race be reported on tax returns. However, the IRS does need to be careful to ensure that there is fairness in tax administration. And when studies like some that have recently been published suggest that algorithms that the IRS may be using are racially biased in the sense they are much more likely to audit, for example, taxpayers of color rather than others with exactly similar circumstances. It's important for the IRS to become aware of that and to make sure that the procedures that they use are fair. But that certainly does not mean looking at race and deciding whom to audit.
So in regards to audits and fairness, you'll never use race or gender in deciding audits?
Race is not available, and as I said, it's important for the IRS to make sure that their tax administration.
So if race isn't
fair.
if race isn't available, your statement about the algorithmics that goes after racial preferences.
Well, the investigators were able to infer that the algorithm had that impact in spite of the fact that they weren't certain what the race was of any particular individual. They used methods to infer that. And this is a more general matter that algorithms are often used. They're sometimes used by those who provide credit. They're not based on race, but it may turn out that they're indirectly, and unintentionally using race, and it's important to understand and correct that when it's occurring.
Without objection, the President's executive order is entered into the record, and I recognize the gentleman from